Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. Let's keep Series 7 of today's Tolkien Times going as we start Week 52 with our new Monday segment, Middle-earth Map Monday. Now, so far this series, we've looked at the Shire and the Old Forest. Today, we're taking a look at Tom Bombadil's other next-door neighbor, the Barrow Downs. We'll look at the etymology, its geography, and some of its history as well. Now first, let's take a look at the etymology behind the name Barrow Downs. Tolkien explains in his nomenclature of The Lord of the Rings that Barrows is a recent adoption by archaeologists of the English dialect word barrow, earlier barrow from Old English berg, hill or mound. Now, way back in episode 55 of the Prancing Pony podcast, that's almost 7 years ago, folks, Sean and I did a Philology Fair segment on Tolkien's use of dwarves as the plural for dwarf. In that segment, we pointed to Tolkien's note in Appendix F to The Lord of the Rings, where he says the plural for dwarves should be dwaros or dweros if singular and plural had each gone its way down the years, as have man and men or goose and geese. And the reason he said that is because the Old English word dwerg, plural dwergas, should have undergone similar changes to berg. Dwerg should have become dwero, just as berg actually became barrow. But of course, linguistic changes don't always do what you think they're going to do. Now, the Oxford English Dictionary explains that barrow generally went out of use in English all the way back before 1400, before it came back again around 1576, where we see the word barrow used in the special sense of a mound of earth or stones erected in early times over a grave. Now, as for the down in Barrow Downs, it simply means a hill or mountain. It's related to the word dune, and it frequently appears in the plural in England as downs, with the meaning of an elevated stretch of open, uncultivated land with gently rolling hills. So, the Barrow Downs just means the Tomb Hills. Now, you might also know the Barrow Downs from their Sindarin name, Tirn Gorthad. Now, that's a compound of the plural Tirn from the singular torn, meaning burial mound, and Gorthad, meaning wraith or spirit of the dead. And that's from Parma Eldalamberon number 17, in case you're wondering. Geographically speaking, the Barrow Downs are a group of hills without trees that are located to the east of the Shire, beyond the Old Forest, but still southwest of Bree. Now, as I talked about just a moment ago, a down is just a hill or mountain, so it is just a group of hills, except that many of the hills had burial mounds on top of them, some with standing stones. And we read a bit about the geography of the region in Chapter 8, Fog on the Barrow Downs, as the hobbits leave Tom and Goldberry behind. Their way wound along the floor of the hollow, and round the green feet of a steep hill into another deeper and broader valley, and then over the shoulders of further hills, and down their long limbs, and up their smooth sides again, up onto new hilltops, and down into new valleys. There was no tree, nor any visible water. It was a country of grass and short springy turf, silent, except for the whisper of the air over the edges of the land, and high lonely cries of strange birds. So now you know what the land looks like, even what it sounds like. But who was buried here? And why were so many hills crowned with burial mounds? Well, let's take a look now at the history of this kind of scary place. And for that, we're going to go to Appendix A, where we read, "It is said that the mounds of Tirn Gorthad, as the Barrow Downs were called of old, are very ancient, and that many were built in the days of the old world of the First Age by the forefathers of the Edain, before they crossed the Blue Mountains into Beleriand, of which Lindon is all that now remains. Those hills were therefore revered by the Dunedain after their return, and there many of their lords and kings were buried." So we've got first-age ancestors of the Edain buried here. We're talking about men who were here before men crossed into Beleriand and encountered Finrod. I mean, this is ancient, ancient times. And not only that, we also have many of the lords and kings of the Dunedain of the North. Anything in between? Well, not much, actually. We learn in Appendix F a bit about the Dunlendings that might be relevant. These were a remnant of the peoples that had dwelt in the vales of the White Mountains in ages past. The dead men of Dunharrow were of their kin. But in the dark years others had removed to the southern dales of the Misty Mountains, and thence some had passed into the empty lands as far north as the Barrow Downs. From them came the men of Bree, and we'll talk about this again next week, but long before these had become subjects of the North Kingdom of Arnor and had taken up the Westron tongue. Now, late in the Second Age, after Elendil escaped the downfall of Numenor and established his realms in exile, that would be Second Age 3320, the region became part of the Kingdom of Arnor. And as we read earlier, they buried their own lords and kings there. After the split of Arnor in Third Age 861, Cardolan was in control of the Barrow Downs. Now, just last week, when talking about the Old Forest, we learned that after Angmar attacked in 1409, a remnant of the faithful among the Dunedain of Cardolan also held out in Tirn Gorthad, the Barrow Downs. Speaking of Cardolan, also in Appendix A, we read this. Some say that the mound in which the ring-bearer was imprisoned had been the grave of the last prince of Cardolan who fell in the War of 1409. And it seems quite likely that it was that last prince's memories of his death that Merry experienced in the Barrow. "Of course, I remember," he said. "The men of Carndum came on us at night and we were worsted. Ah, the spear in my heart!" He clutched at his breast. No, he said, opening his eyes. "What am I saying? I've been dreaming." Now, a couple of hundred years after Cardolan was wiped out, this would be Third Age 1636, the Great Plague arrived, and we read in Appendix A that it was at this time that an end came of the Dunedain of Cardolan, and evil spirits out of Angmar and Rhudaur entered into the deserted mounds and dwelt there. And then in Unfinished Tales, The Hunt for the Ring, we read a bit more about this particular moment. The Witch King had known something of the country long ago in his wars with the Dunedain, and especially of the Tirn Gorthad of Cardolan, now the Barrow Downs, whose evil wights had been sent there by himself. And in one version of The Hunt for the Ring, we read that the Black Captain established a camp at Andrath, where the Greenway passed in a defile between the Barrow Downs and the South Downs. And from there, some others were sent to watch and patrol the eastern borders, while he himself visited the Barrow Downs. In notes on the movements of the Black Riders at that time, it is said that the Black Captain stayed there for some days, and the Barrow Wights were roused, and all things of evil spirit, hostile to elves and men, were on the watch with malice in the Old Forest and on the Barrow Downs. And folks, that is it for the Barrow Downs. Next week, let's visit a happier place, shall we? I think we'll make for the village of Bree and the Prancing Pony Inn. And folks, that wraps it up for Middle-earth Map Monday. But if you have a mailbag question that you'd like me to answer next series, please email it to barliman@theprancingponypodcast.com. Please do that, because the reason I'm covering maps this series is because Barliman's bag is basically empty. So send it in and let him know it's for today's Tolkien Times. I'll get to it as soon as possible, with priority going to supporters of the show on Patreon. Now, if you'd like to help me keep making this show better, please consider visiting patreon.com/TolkienTimes to find out how you can join the TTT Content Council, get a bonus episode every week, and a lot more. And then join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times for Tolkien Tuesday as we learn more about the professor himself. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Please follow or subscribe on podcast apps and follow @Tolkien Times on social media. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.